All right, guys, at the BDG group meeting, we're recording this the night before, so here's some introductions with Andrew and Haakan here, and I'm going to let them take it away for a couple minutes to introduce themselves.
Go ahead, Haakan. We'll let you go first, buddy.
Oh Lord, great. Okay, so I'm Haakan, Haakan Light. Um, I'm a automotive technical instructor, also the manager of training and development for Top Don USA. So I teach technical classes at a wide variety of some of the major events across the country. Develop a lot of training content surrounding all the Top Don tools and whatnot. I also have my own LLC and do mobile and remote diagnostics and programming. And it is not official or anything yet, but I will likely be signing on to do hotline calls through Diagnation in the very near future as well. So lots and lots and lots of solving problems as much as I possibly can. So that's really what I enjoy the most. So I spend the most of my time trying to solve problems, whether it's something with a tool for Top Don or something along the lines of a car with a technician. But that's really what I enjoy. And I've tried to distill the things that I've learned through my experience in the field, which is since I was 16 years old. I started in the field at 16 in a tire shop, just like a lot of people did. And I've tried to distill a lot of what I've learned, both through trial and error, but mentorship, training, things like that, into the classes that I have, so that the classes that I teach can reach anybody at any skill level and provide value and some effective things that you can take back and actually use on a daily basis. So the two classes that I was suggesting for the group, I'll pull up my outlines here in front of me. So the two classes I was suggesting is I have a diagnostics and critical thinking class, which I'm actually teaching literally tomorrow here in Detroit at NACAT. And this class is basically centered around a number of different principles, which are highly applicable to all situations in a shop, truth be told. We delve into some of the things that are more specific, like scan tools and scopes, and just some of the stuff surrounding them. But in the outline, basically, we got a number of different things. We talk about critical thinking, which is really an element that we can apply to all things in our lives, but specifically in our time in the shop. And it can really help us eliminate a lot of the errors we make, but also just get better data that we can give to our customers to sell the jobs more accurately and more effectively. Um, Talk about the scientific process or uh, scientific method in the class, which is essentially what you use to build a diagnostic process. The scientific method is a shorter version of the diagnostic process, but we'll talk about the diagnostic process in the class and just all the steps that are necessary to use. And those can really be applied across the board on all of the different tasks you do, whether we're talking about diagnosing a relatively simple system, like perhaps something like a TPMS system, or if we're doing something more complex like drivability, where there are a lot more variables in play. We'll talk about process consistency in the class, really about making sure that once you get a strategy or you find a way of doing a certain thing, you want to do it that way as consistently as you can and repetitively so that you can make sure that your results are consistent. I think that's another thing a lot of people really struggle with, and including myself for many, many years, and even these days occasionally as well. Also, talking about just some kind of mental aspects of what it takes to be successful at the diagnostic process as well as the critical thinking process. There are things that we have to realize: reflection, accountability, ownership, things like that. You have to be able to look in the mirror and be willing to say, you know what, I messed up and I can do better. There's a lot of humbling that takes place throughout as you grow as being a diagnostic specialist, or even just someone who's doing diagnostics on a daily basis, or even just repair, right? We all make mistakes. It's really important that we have the right attitude about those mistakes and that we use them in the appropriate way to improve how we do our jobs. And then acknowledgement and acceptance, right? You can't know everything. You're not perfect. You're never going to learn everything. You just have to have the right attitude that there are things that, hey, every day you wake up, something's going to be different. Every day you wake up, something's going to be changing, whether it's in your personal life or in your professional life. Cars continue to evolve. Technology continues to move forward and become more complicated. And we want to be able to get ourselves mentally prepared for that so that it doesn't become a pain point or frustration that derails your ability to concentrate and focus. Because it's easy to get hyper focused on that stuff. On the second section of the class, we'll talk about literally everything surrounding the nuts and the bolts of what it takes to get through that diagnostic process. So understanding service information, wiring diagrams, technical service bulletins, not only where to find them, what utility they have, just the kind of things that you're going to use them for on a daily basis, and also some different ways to acquire that information, maybe that you're not familiar with, because it's not as cut and dry as jumping on Identifix or Mitchell or AllData. And a lot of people are not necessarily familiar with some of the limitations of the aftermarket service information in the same intimate details that I am. And that also comes from 6 years of working for Identifix.
Yep.
So I do have a lot of knowledge on that for that reason. And then we'll talk about different testing tools we're going to use for diagnosis, right? So scopes, scan tools, EVOMs, thermal imagers, and some of the really very crucial critical thinking points surrounding those tool usages. Because in reality, how you use those tools, you really have to understand what can they do for you, what can they not do for you, what are their limitations, how you connect a scope to a circuit, how that's going to affect what the meaning of the information you're collecting is. There's so many different elements like that that in the classes I've taken, and I've taken a lot of training myself, I feel that a lot of that gets kind of glazed over or missed. And so we're really going to talk about that because that's the meat and potatoes of what you really need to be thinking about as you spend your time setting up your test plan. The more time you spend thinking about it before you go do it, the better you're going to have as far as results. And also maybe you have to do one test instead of two or three because you're more efficient and you're more accurate. Better to, measure twice, cut once, as they say. And then the third part of the class is really focused on evaluation and judgment. And this is, again, a thing that we all really struggle with as we work through growing into diagnostics is knowing what's good, knowing what's bad, understanding how we can get confident about what's good or bad. Also realizing that sometimes one test isn't enough. Sometimes we need to triangulate a problem by collecting two or three pieces of data that can all point to the same conclusion, right? And that's really critical because that increases your accuracy a lot. The other thing that we always want to remember throughout the process of realizing, our evaluation and judgment stage or step, so to speak, is we have to understand that we want to know when we're going through this, are we collecting data that has meaning? Are we being efficient and adaptive about how we do our testing? Because again, anybody who's worked on cars for a long period of time, such as Andy here, will tell you, hey, I may be able to do a scope test on that, but if there is a faster mechanical inspection technique that will yield the exact same diagnostic conclusion, why would you pick the thing that takes longer? Now, maybe your shop strategy has more to do with, hey, we want a scope capture because that's how we sell our process, or maybe that's how we market our skills. If that be the case, okay, then maybe it's justifiable, but otherwise, you want to be able to be adaptive in your approach so that you can maximize the data you collect in the least amount of time and get the most accurate conclusion without wasting unnecessary time. And that is another thing I think that gets glazed over in classes a lot of the time is not necessarily being mindful of efficiency being very crucial. You got a lot of cars to get through, got a lot of problems to solve. You want to solve them as efficiently and accurately as possible. So being adaptive in how you approach those things is really important. And then in the end of the class, we'll do some case studies where we talk about, hey, this is specifically what you're going to be applying, and we'll walk you through applying all the principles we've talked about. We'll pause and we'll do some critical thinking examination of each of those elements so that we can kind of look at, okay, at this stage, here's where we are. We're doing service information. What are some critical thinking points here as we go through this, right? And we'll make it interactive in that aspect. So I think that will really benefit a lot of people being able to see some real world examples and application. And so that's the first class. And then the second class is probably a little bit more along the lines of what you would see typically offered, but through a different lens, right? Through the lens of the way I think. And that is a scope introduction or 101 level class. Now, just because 101 doesn't mean it's truly only beginners. I talked to a number of people who have been to scope classes before who have now taken this class and said that they learned quite a bit from the class. You'll see the things that I go through in the scope class are very methodical, right? We talk about how do we get the waveform on the screen? What are the basic electrical principles we have to understand before we even try to hook up the scope? What are the different things about scope hardware we have to understand in order to use the scope effectively? Do we understand what the different probes that we can attach to a scope and how they're going to affect the signal and the meaning of the signal? Understanding things like attenuators. What's the purpose? What's the function? Why do we need it? And things of that nature. Also talking about even just hardware specs on a scope, right? Why is there a difference between something like a picoscope that's fairly expensive versus maybe something like the top-down scope, which is quite a bit more affordable, right? It's not apples to apples. Well, you can do probably 90 to 95% of the same tests with both of them. Sometimes that extra 5%, you do need something more expensive and higher powered like a picoscope. So we'll talk about a lot of that kind of stuff. We'll talk about just the different things that how we can use the scope to truly see what's happening in a system in its totality, all in one shot, the same way a control module would look at it in real time, which is something that we always have to worry about with scan tools due to sample rate and things of that nature. And then in the second section, basically I take you through a variety of common tests that you're going to use on a daily or regular basis. Now, that would be anything from relative compression testing, which is just an absolutely huge value, even though it's not an overly complicated or time consuming test, but it has a lot of value. Uh, Starting and charging system testing, another one that has a ton of value, especially on vehicles that face extreme climate, right? I live in Minnesota, gets really cold and reasonably hot. If you live up in the Northeast, it snows quite a bit, gets pretty cold, right? So I'm sure you get plenty of no crank, no starts and crank, no starts, and a scope can definitely be a huge aid in solving those. We'll talk about other common tests like cam and crank correlation. Lots of modern vehicles are experiencing timing issues. We'll do a little bit of a brief introduction into pulse sensor diagnostics for intake and exhaust and crankcase and coolant. We'll also do some in-cylinder, just basic waveform anatomy, setup, considerations, things of that nature, secondary ignition, just some introductory stuff to get you familiar with what does the waveform anatomy look like and things like that. And then basically going to wrap that class up by doing some practical examples, showing you just a few cases where, hey, we're using the scope to actually find the problem here. And if we decide that we want to make this into a 4-hour classroom and a 4-hour hands-on, we can absolutely do that. I very much appreciate the opportunity to spend time setting scopes up on real cars and doing some of that testing, and even just trying to practice some of the more basic tests that you're going to try to use frequently. That's absolutely invaluable. So I hope we'd have an opportunity to do that. That's probably the best way to do scoping, is to be able to have some hands-on time. But those are the two classes that I think are probably the most valuable in the everyday shop from my lineup of what I can offer. So let's hear what Andy has to offer. Andy has quite a few really good classes, so I'm sure you guys are going to get excited about what he has as well.
Man, how do you follow that up? So I'm a little more short and sweet, guys. So my name's Andrew Fischer. I am a trainer. I own my own training company called VAX, Fisher Automotive Consulting and Training Services. I'm a technician. I work in the shop every day. I don't get to do all the cool stuff Haakan does, but I'm in the bays every day. So my classes are really designed for the everyday technician, just trying to get through the rigmarole of every day. So one of my favorite classes, one that gets a lot of good feedback, is what we call the diagnostic playbook. Very much like Hawkins, it starts building you out with a diagnostic process and where to go next. Like, you're getting a bunch of information, a bunch of things have been thrown at you. Where do we need to go next, and why do we make that assessment to go there? We do a bunch of different tips, tricks, and techniques with scopes, with scan tools, with everyday tooling. Again, there's a time and a place for every type of tool when you're living in a flat rate world. So I try to use as much of those as possible to streamline the event there with that one. Another class that gets a lot of feedback is my scan tool analysis class, which is really emissions for the non-emissions technician. So we spend a lot of time talking about the differences between enhanced and generic data, using it for pre-conditioning the vehicle and post-conditioning after we make a repair. We spend a lot of time explaining why we do most of my drivability in the generic side of the scan tool versus the enhanced, and then just repair verification more than anything. You know, how many times have we shipped a car out of the door and go, man, I really hope it's fixed,
Yeah.
but there's ways we can prove that, right? So that's another class that I really enjoy to present. One of my newest classes is a oxygen sensor air fuel class, which is really going back in time, spending some time with oxygen sensors. Being out on the road teaching these classes over the years, we've learned that a lot of technicians, especially some of the newer ones, still struggle with oxygen sensors. So how can I teach air fuel if we don't spend some time on oxygen sensors? So we build the process up from oxygen sensors all the way up to 4 and 5 wire air fuel sensors, and we're currently adding in stuff every day to that particular class. That's a ever evolving class because of the different types of platforms we're seeing, where we get front air fuel sensors and rear air fuel sensors in the case of some Toyota and Lexus products now. So that one is always evolving. Those would be the top ones that I would recommend, judging by what you've shared with me. You guys are looking for. We've also got a misfire class that's again very foundational. It's just building some processes and building up to, you know, is this mechanical? Is this fuel? Is this ignition? Is it erroneous? So those would be the top classes, judging by what our conversation has been. I think would bring the most benefit for your organization.
Very cool. Very cool. And yeah, so I think a lot of shops in the Rochester area, like, they struggle with problem cars, like, and what I've been trying to explain to all these shop owners when they call me is, like, a lot of vehicles I fix with just a just the basics and, like, the same kind of plan every time, at least to start, right? Like, the same kind of process. And I think a lot of these shops, and you guys might agree and you might not, but a lot of these shops, like, they have guys that don't necessarily know exactly where to start at all. So
Yeah.
they hit a roadblock, and they're also, the time's ticking. So they're like, they get jammed up. And I think the pressure from the workday kicks their, you know, it used to kick my ass. The pressure from the workday was like, there's so much stuff to get done, and I have to diagnose these cars. I don't even know where to start, like, with anything. And, you know, it's hard
Yeah, I
for
mean,
me to explain to these guys because they know me as, like, a diagnostic guy, but you guys all know me as, like, I pulled my head out of a Bondo can, you know, like, but it's hard to explain to them that, like, just 10 years ago, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing on the, maybe a little bit more than that now, on the automotive side. Like, I started pretty fresh with this stuff, and kind of, I still haven't mastered the basics, but I still find myself going back to the basics all the time, and just getting a plan together. And one thing that I've found that's helped me huge is just knowing how a system works. Like, figuring that if I don't know, which I don't know everything, I never will. Not when you go into service information, like, looking for, knowing where to look for, like, description and operation. What are you expecting out of what are you trying to fix, and what is it expected to, how is it expected to work, I guess I should say. So, but I think that a lot of these guys can benefit from just developing a game plan, like, developing the, not, I don't want to call them the basics, but, like, maybe seeing a couple different like, a couple different instructors, like you guys have real world experience every day, right? So you're diagnosing cars every day, and you're in the trenches too. So, like, how do you start, right? How do you get moving with a diagnostic evaluation of a car?
yeah, I mean, most things are foundational.
Yeah.
I don't like the term basics because it turns a lot of technicians and owners off. But
Yep.
the reality,
Foundations is
That's a
better.
bad word to use.
yeah,
Basics.
and the reality is, I mean, in my world, what I do here in the shop, most of the problems we see, and we get a lot of problem vehicles brought into us too, but it's generally foundational, and it's just lack of understanding and or lack of time. You know, Justin
Yep.
Morgan says it best: we're selling our souls 6 minutes at a time in the flat rate world. So I completely empathize and understand why it becomes a struggle for a lot of people.
Well, if you got no process or structure, it's pretty easy to get off the tracks real
Right.
fast,
Right.
Yeah,
especially with distractions, right? So if you have no workflow or strategy or process, it's like you get interrupted. What was I thinking about? How was I going to do this? What was my train of thought?
Yep.
All
well,
of those things get awful challenging.
Yep.
Well, it's like we say, you know, the process doesn't fail you, you fail the process. So the minute you can develop a process, on any type of system, and you can relate it to, I don't care if it's brake, suspension, interior, AC, but if you have the same systematic approach, it's not going to fail you. Just when you skip steps, that's when you're going to fail
Right,
it. So,
right. And it goes.
Shortcuts.
I think that
Oops.
I think that goes with most things in life, right? And I find myself calling it the basics just so just so I can explain it to a shop owner or like a
yeah,
technician
yeah,
that like it's not it's not like it's not as intense or rocket science as you think it is. It's more foundational, like you said, and I think that's a better word to use for it because it's not. I don't want to say it's easy, but like if you have a game plan, you can get through most problems pretty easy. I think like most of the
Yeah.
stuff that ends up in my bay from other shops, I can use my same process and I can usually knock it out pretty fast. You know?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you do the mobile stuff, you like people glamorize it and make it sound like it's fancy, but the hilarious reality of it is it's like 90% of the cars you get through and you're like, that was it? You're like disappointed. Like you think it's going to be something crazy
Yeah.
hard and
Yep.
insane. And don't get me wrong, usually when you do get the crazy hard cars, you're like miserable and pissed off
Yeah. Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
never mind. Give me that other car that was just like straightforward, right? But
Yep.
sometimes you like ask yourself, wait a minute, was it meant to be that? Was that really what tripped him up? I mean, I had an old Buick 3800 that I went out to a shop and they had a misfire and they're like scratching their heads and can't figure it out. And I literally find that it's missing a power feed to one of the injectors. So I literally jump a 12-volt feed to the back of the injector and back probe it, and the engine smooths out. And I'm like, what? What?
Yep.
Like, no way. No way. And it's got a damaged wiring harness. That's it. And I'm just, oh, like, those are the things that I think there's a lot of the part of the critical thinking stuff that I talk about. It's really boiling it down to something foundational like, what does it need?
What
Is
doesn't
it
it
if
have?
it's missing something, try giving it what it needs.
yeah,
If it needs power or ground and you find it's missing, give it that and see what happens. Like
Yep.
sometimes so when I worked at Identifix, the last guy I worked under manager wise was like the most just absolutely Andy, you would have loved him. He was just phenomenal. He'd be like walk over the car and he'd have a suspicion, they had the motor out or whatever, and he'd be like, oh yeah, they had the motor out. He'd be like, go get some jumper cables. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes,
Yeah.
go get some
Missed the
jumper
main
cables.
ground.
Run it from the block to the battery negative. And I'm
Yep.
like, oh my God, that's super smart. But like grounds being left off is a super easy thing to do
Absolutely.
when you're removing a powertrain. And so he was just so very matter of fact like that, where he was just like, nope, this is the easiest, straightforward, simple way to answer the question, what's missing? Or is this the problem?
Right.
And, probably 90% of the time, that's the problem when it's a no start right after an engine replacement,
Right.
right? So
Yep.
stuff like that. I think just being able to realize those really foundational concepts and how fast those can solve those problems. I mean, you get people in with Volkswagen Audi, right? They struggle with the cars because there is a acute lack of information a lot of the time. But even things like I had a guy recently that was dealing with a crankcase breather problem on one of the cars, and he was seeing an issue with oil leaks, and he felt there was a crankcase breather problem, but at idle he wasn't finding anything. But it's a turbocharged car, and I said, "Well, did you also check it under a load? Because if you're checking a crankcase breather system, you need to check it both at idle. You also need to check it under rev. Why? Well, because there's one-way check valves in the turbocharger piping system as well as the vacuum lines. And oh, Andy lost connection. And if you do not make sure that you are checking it under both situations, you're going to miss stuff, right? Like just fundamentally, you will miss things. And so I think it's stuff like that where just understanding the importance of dynamic testing and realizing just how you need to be able to account for, hey, this particular component is exercised through a variety of different conditions. We have to make sure we're exercising it through all those conditions before we can make a valid and accurate judgment of what's wrong or whether it is or is not healthy. And that's another thing that I mean, I've messed that up so many times. That's why I'm so hard on that stuff now, right?
Yep. And that makes perfect sense. Yeah. I like that. I appreciate you guys. You know, taking the time to talk about this kind of stuff. And we'll get with these guys and see what they want and when, and then we'll figure out when the who,
Just
the what,
don't
the when.
edit my video to make any crazy stuff like Falco with the stroke, stroke, stroke. Oh my God, dude. Every time that video gets shared, I just die.
You know, the other thing too, Mike, like
Yeah.
I've constantly got to do like class adjustments on the fly for Tech Fix and for the state admissions program here.
Yes, you do.
So like if there's like a specific need that everybody's like, man, like we're really struggling with this. Generally, with Hawkins' help and a few of our other friends, man, I can generally slam something that came out wrong, but I can
Yeah.
usually pull something together pretty quickly too.
Yeah, and I was thinking maybe if we put it to the shop owners, maybe they can run a survey in their shop and figure out like what do we need the most help on. Maybe I could do like a Google response form or something and just get like a general consensus of like what do we need the most help on.
Find out what their comebacks are. What's your top comeback cars, and what's the fault that they had?
So we run that through TechFix quite a bit. We run those like questions,
Nice.
Surveys.
Yeah, and the one thing that constantly comes back, and I mean, dude, monthly because this gets sent out monthly. It's literally the process. Like, how do we develop a process for a misfire, a fuel trim concern?
Okay.
And like when you try telling them, like, guys, it's actually pretty small process, and you can put it in application against everything. You generally get requests for those. That seems to be a big, at least in the shop fix community right now. And then everybody likes the new tools and the techniques, in cylinder intake, pressure pulse. I just do mine super stupid, and what I mean by that is it's so easy I can do it.
Where's Waldo? Keep it
it's-
simple.
Yeah, like you know me, I'm a sensible diagnostics guy. I use 4 of my 5 senses all the time.
Right.
And that seems to be pretty popular in this area. But again, man, if you put it to them, and the other thing I hear all the time is wiring diagrams. Amazingly.
Oh yes.
So,
But there is a lot in wiring diagrams I think a lot of guys aren't aware of. I mean, one of the cases is in my NACAT class is literally just a perfect example of that. You saw it the other day, Andy. It's the Yukon one where I'm talking about how, hey, a lot of guys aren't going to notice there's a pull-up resistor on the cam sensor signal circuit. And like, I get, like, for years, I never paid attention to any of that stuff. I get it. But I also never had that as a problem. So it was like, well, it never burned me before. So why would I notice, right?
I don't want to keep Mike up too late, but I mean, just think of it like this, man. Like, the problem is nobody's ever taught that stuff, right?
No.
Agreed.
What guys jump into when classes are generally offered, if you put them up against 5 or 6 classes and somebody sees a name like JT, they're going to take a JT class, even though it's probably far above what their skill set is right now.
Right.
And personal opinion, I think that's where like the big disconnect comes. There's not really a pathway per se for the technician to grow.
Yeah, you're skipping a lot of steps. All right, guys. So our conversation got a little cut off. We lost connection. I lost like audio connection for some reason. But that was Andrew Fischer, Haakan Light. I've known both of them for a while, and they're very much involved in this industry still. They're very much involved in fixing vehicles. They can both, I think, offer a really good hands-on approach to diagnostics in the shop, like to maybe something that every tech in your shop can take away, or maybe just the guy that you're choosing to just be your main diagnostic technician or your drivability guy. I think they can both offer a lot of help. Andrew runs a shop in Indiana, so he's like front of the house, but he's also in the shop diagnosing. He's kind of like in and out. Haakan works for TopDon, but he also owns a diagnostic helpline. But he did work at Identifix too for years, so he has that ability to like talk over the phone to somebody and help them out with a problem, which I do a ton of. I used to do a ton of that. I still do it sometimes, but not as much as I used to. But that's probably the hardest. Over the phone, helping somebody is probably the hardest way to try to fix a car or help fix a car. So if you have the ability to do that, you usually have a pretty strong ability to teach a class in person. just due to having to explain to somebody how to do tests over the phone without actually physically being there, being able to like touch the car, touch the tooling, things like that. So if anybody wants me to elaborate on anything or wants them to elaborate on anything, we kind of want to figure out what everybody's struggles are in the shop. So maybe you guys can collectively make a Google response form, or maybe somebody can collect a bunch of notes from this meeting, so everybody can kind of figure out what emotion or what can you guys all agree on that you need help with. And I know, like, I could even say in our own shop, like we could probably use help with everything sometimes, but what is probably going to make the most sense to focus on, and hopefully we can come to, everybody can kind of put their heads together and come up with just a few topics or a few things that are struggled with weekly, because they can cater classes around what we're struggling with as a group. Me personally, I think that most people are going to struggle with service information. So like knowing where to find the information, and find it quickly and efficiently using service information. So like if you need to know how a system works, you need to do some troubleshooting. I think it's helpful to know where to find the info and how to find the info. I think another thing too is like circuit load testing, voltage drop testing. I feel like everybody can learn from that, and that's something that's, we could do some hands-on stuff, and I think I could really make some light bulbs click for that. Another thing too is like I think a lot of people think that I jump right to the scope when I'm fixing a car, and that's just simply not true. What I try to do is if I'm trying to do a test and the scope is going to yield me the quickest answers, the quickest results, something that I need to see, that's when I jump to the scope. But a lot of stuff, like we scan for codes, we figure out customer concerns, like what happened, when did it happen, why did it happen, is there something we can correlate to the incident when that car broke down, or what happened there. Visual inspections, we find issues with visuals all the time. Voltage drop testing, powers and grounds. Circuit load testing, actually loading up a circuit with a headlight bulb. And one of the main things too is if I don't know exactly how a system works, or like how that system gets its inputs so it can output, that's where service information fills in those gaps for me. So I think if you guys can decide, do you want Andrew to come out? Do you want Haakan to come out? Do you want them both to come out at separate times? I think they both can offer a lot of help, in really like delivering information, delivering topics in a way that everybody can understand. Doesn't matter what level you're at. I think everybody can benefit from it. So hopefully you guys all get a chance to watch this in its entirety, and maybe we can have a discussion about it by the next meeting and get these guys scheduled. So appreciate it, and thanks for watching, guys.